Today I'm going to show you how to Ewrap on a round loom. You will need a round loom, your needle tool, and a skein of yarn. This tutorial is meant to show you the technique of the Ewrap knit stitch. So the number of pegs on your loom or the weight of your yarn is not super important at this point. The most important thing is you just make sure that you're already casted onto your round loom. If you do not know how to cast onto your loom, go ahead and hit the link in the description so you can see the tutorial on how exactly to do that. As you see here, I'm showing you what the Ewrap knit stitch looks like. I've done several rows already, just so you have a good idea of what it's going to look like. Now go ahead and grab your working yarn, which is the yarn that is still attached to the skein. And we are going to wrap peg number 1. Take your working yarn, and you're going to bring it behind that first peg and in between peg 1 and 2 to bring the yarn around to the front of peg 1. Then you're going to bring the yarn around to the back and you have wrapped your peg 1 time. That is the Ewrap. So now you're going to do the same thing to peg number 2. Bring the yarn behind it, around to the side, to the front, to the other side, and now you have Ewrapped peg number 2. You will continue to wrap each peg so they have 2 loops of yarn on each. Since you are already casted on each peg, you will notice that the pegs are already wrapped with a loop that is down on the bottom of the loom. When you are creating this Ewrap stitch, you are creating a second loop on each peg. It is important to note that while you are wrapping the peg, you do not want to pull the yarn very tight around the peg. You want it to be snug around the peg so it's not unraveling off each peg when you move to the next one, but you also do not want it so tight because that will cause tension problems later where you will not be able to pull the loops off of the pegs as you will need to in the next step. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you guys can get other tutorials for beginners in loom knitting. So now we are finishing up the second loop on each of the last pegs. You are going to take your working yarn and bring it between the last and the first peg and wrap it just once or twice around your anchor peg to secure it while you do this next step. So go ahead and hold that in place and grab your needle tool, and you're going to use that and you're going to place the needle tool below your bottom loop. You're going to bring it up and pull that out just a little bit because you're going to need to pull that bottom loop up over the top loop and off of the peg. So now that we are down to 1 loop on the last peg, go ahead and unwrap your anchor peg. You don't have to worry about any unraveling. You're going to now continue to remove those bottom loops off of each peg until each peg only has 1 loop left. And remember, if you are having a difficult time pulling that bottom loop up off of your peg, or your top loop is slipping off as you're coming over the top, it's likely because you have too much tension on your loops, meaning you've wrapped your pegs too tightly. So just go ahead and take everything off of your loom and start over. And don't let that discourage you. I had to start over plenty of times when I was a beginner as well, solely because I was wrapping the pegs too tight. So here we're at the end of our loom and removing those last bottom pegs off of our loom, off of the pegs. And now we are going to push all of the loops that are remaining down to the bottom. Now you can do this individually or you can just use your hand. I like to put mine on the inside of the loom and just use my fingers to press a few down all at once, but that's up to you. It doesn't really make it that much faster. It's just how I've become accustomed to doing it. So now you are going to begin your next Ewrap row, and it's simply by repeating the process again of wrapping each peg until each peg has 2 loops on it, just like we did before. And I'm going to let you see me do this in real time here. And now all of our pegs have 2 loops on them, so I've wrapped my anchor peg. I'm using my needle tool to remove the bottom loop off the last peg, unwrapping my anchor peg and going to peg 1, and now lifting all those bottom loops on the remaining ones. I always start with the last peg of removing that bottom loop, because I have found that if you leave that on and start with the first peg and you lose your grip on the working yarn, it can unravel and then you have to start over E-wrapping that row that you've just completed. And that's it, guys. So each row consists of wrapping the peg, and when you have those 2 loops on the pegs, then you go through and you remove the bottom loops with your needle tool. And that's it. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit so you can see me do a few more rounds, and I hope you guys are finding this useful. And just as a word of advice from my own personal experience, I know that it's so exciting to learn to do something new, and it can be easy to want to jump into doing your first project right away, but you will probably save yourself a lot of frustration if you just practice your technique like this several times before you actually get into the project. That way your tension is correct. That way, if you're missing a step, you're not doing that in the middle of an actual project, and it's not going to matter as much if you have to start over from the beginning. But it is very frustrating if you're in the middle of the project and realize you forget something and have to start over. So I'm going to go ahead, and this will be my last row that I do. And I'm just going to go ahead and show you that this is what your rows should look like. Kind of looks like braids going in a vertical fashion down towards the bottom. It is normal to have that rolling down on the bottom if you have not created a brim or have finished it yet. And this is just tugging on that yarn so you can kind of see those horizontal rows that remain in between. And there's a view of the inside of your project. Alright everyone, well that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you one way that you can cast off. This cast off method will be a cinch type method that would be typical to use when you're making hats. You can use this closure for other things as well, so be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on the next tutorial as well as any others that I make. Have a good day, guys.